Everybody, you are in for a treat today. I'm excited to have Ed from Southern Eucs on the Flower Podcast. Welcome, Ed.
Thank you. Thank you very much, man. Happy to be here. Happy to be here.
Well, when I joined the ASCFG, I found out a little bit more about you at that time because I noticed that you were on their website in their resource area. And even before that, though, having lived in the Atlanta area for so long, I heard rumors. I heard rumors of this guy south of the city that was obsessed with eucalyptus that were hardy. And I thought, "Ah, one day I will meet this person." And then when we moved down to the Byron Perry area of Georgia, and I drive up through the area where you not far from where you live,
Mhm.
I'm like, okay, I've got to make this happen now. And so it was really great. We got to walk around a little bit last Friday. It was really nice to see your operation and see some of your little babies
Mhm.
and your big ones, I might add. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah. The trials
anyway,
gardens.
yeah. So I'm fascinated about this topic, and eucalyptus are trending so hot right now. What a perfect place for you to be in, you know, embracing this whole genus. So I'm just dying to know, how did you get into this growing eucalyptus, or this passion of eucalyptus, and where did it all begin?
Sure. Sure. I think probably, Scott, that person that when you heard about it years ago, not saying you're old or anything like that, but was probably Angus Heeps. I don't know if you know Angus, but if in the Atlanta area, high-end designer, was the horticulturist for the Fernbank Science Center. So Angus was growing them, and he had a little place where he grew a lot of his plants down here, but he did a lot of his work in Atlanta. And he was the first one that started realizing, hey, wait a minute, I see these things all over, all over England where he's from. Not a lot of difference, maybe 10 or 12 degrees difference and everything. So he started kind of trialing them here in Atlanta and putting them in some of his designs up in Buckhead Designs and all. If you're not from Atlanta, Buckhead's a nice area. People are willing to try new things. There's a real adventuresome spirit as far as plants and horticulture. So he was growing them there. And at that time, I was starting opening a nursery. I am a television producer by trade. I was in the industry. This is early 2000s. Had done television for about 20 years, and I just wanted to do something different. I wanted to follow my passion. And you and I spoke on last week, and you saw what that passion was. It was plants. Anything plants. I just, as a kid, I was that kid. I think I read something about yourself too. I had the grow lights, and I had the different plants in the rooms and on shelves, and I had a little vegetable garden. I didn't understand anything about it, but I would get a carrot or a tomato or a head of lettuce every once in a while, and I was happy. Well, that just kind of continued. And, when you produce TV, you don't want to come home and watch TV. So you plan. I went back, got certified as a master gardener through the University of Georgia, which is a great program for anyone considering it. Don't be intimidated by it. It's a fabulous program. I went through that, and then I just started putting a plan together, open a nursery. I wanted to do a kind of a Georgia grown nursery, plants that were grown in the area. Not that they had to be native or anything specific, but I thought plants that were grown in their containers and in the fields here would transfer better than a plant brought from the West Coast or the Northeast. So I started the nursery, and while I was putting it all together, this large man, big beard, kind of scraggly gray, I'll never forget, a big wool sweater. And it was like August, and I was like, what's he doing? And I was at the nursery, and he came into my nursery, but it wasn't a nursery yet. It was just a house. I bought an old house that I was so I was cutting the grass and everything, because we still had to get past all the certification, for land, conditional use and all that through the county. And he's like, are you responsible for this? And I thought, oh boy, here's my first, why are you turning this house into a business? And I said, I am, sir. And he said, what are you doing? And I told him what I was going to do with display gardens and things like that. And he said, well, it's about time someone figured it out in this area on the south side. Because I was trying to build like a Habersham Gardens or a
Yeah,
Hastings,
yeah.
high-end nursery on the south side of town, which really wasn't used to that. Our nurseries were, some were on asphalt, some were maybe some black tarp spread out, with a trailer. We did everything from, everything from rabbit habitats to not a miniature golf, but we had a little golf course for the 2 holes for the husbands, if you will, who weren't into plants, could come and hit the golf ball. We did display gardens. We did it all. but Angus started telling me about his eucalyptus, and I started retailing him, and I was the only person retailing him. He was growing them for himself and putting them in these landscape designs, and he was bringing them to me because I was kind of on his way between, like you said, between where he lived in Locust Grove and Atlanta, where he did business. And then I couldn't keep them in, Scott. These, they were new, they were fragrant, they were disease resistant, they're evergreen, they're different, they have great colors, and I couldn't keep them in fast enough. And Angus really couldn't keep pace because he was really just growing them for his designs. Well, long story short, I was in the nursery business for about 4 years, and brought on a partner. It wasn't a good decision. Got back into television. About 15 years later, the TV thing started kind of reverting back. Times got a little tough and everything like that. And I was like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? Angus had passed years ago, but I pulled into my driveway, and I think you saw the tree now that's affectionately called Angus, 30-foot tall tree eucalyptus, kind of staring at me. And I said, this is what I'm going to do. And I just kind of picked up from his trials and expanded it even further, and just started, finding seed sources from the coldest regions in the world, planting a ton of them. The trials kind of followed my TV career. I was doing a show in North Carolina, so I have all these trials in North Carolina. I went up to southern Pennsylvania, and I brought some trees up there. Of course, Georgia, the Atlanta area. And I just plant it, and observed. And then when I finally got to a point, and because the species itself, there's 700 eucalyptus species, so it's an extremely broad, diverse species, and most of them aren't cold hardy in zone 6, 7, and 8. But we're at the point now, we've identified 15 species that are truly cold hardy. And the first year that I really started doing it in mass was, I don't know if you remember, about 4 or 5 years ago, where we dipped into the single digits 2 winters in a row. So I thought, oh boy, I'm gonna know real quick. At first I was like, oh, only me, woe is me, bad luck. And then I thought, well, no, I'll know really quick if these things can handle it. And they did. Again, some didn't. Some did what they're supposed to do. But a lot of them handled it. And those are the ones that we've continued to observe and propagate, and now sell, now make available.
Well, I had no idea there are 700 species of eucalyptus. And it's my understanding that most of them are indigenous to Australia, right? Or are there other parts of the world?
New Zealand, Australia are the main areas. Now they've spread so much because they're for timber. So South America, I think it's about over 90% of a lot of the timber sources. So they've spread to obviously parts of the country. A lot of people, you see them in California. That's kind of where I fell in love with them, in Northern California. I was up there working, and I hadn't seen them before. And they're majestic. A lot of them are very, very large trees. Some of them are some of the largest trees in the world. Now, again, because the species has so many, some will finish at 200-300 feet, but we found ones that are finishing at 7 and 8 feet. So again, it's just a very diverse species. But yeah, they're a large tree, and are used around the planet for lots of different things. I mean, there's probably a dozen items in your house right now that, if you look at whether it's toothpaste or mouthwash or any kind of antiseptics and everything like that, you probably see eucalyptus that you don't even know in about 10 or 15 products around your house.
Well, plus I think I have about 3 areas in the house that has dried eucalyptus in it. So, being in the floral industry, we're sort of tainted when it comes to some of that. Sure. And it dries so wonderfully.
Yeah.
That's just one of the other benefits. When I'm thinking about eucalyptus and I think about the trends, I know that in California, a lot of times, well, first of all, I'll share the story. Like, I want to say it was maybe 20 years ago, give or take a year. And I was driving through, I want to say it was like around Santa Cruz, Watsonville, south of San Francisco. And I noticed these bulldozers literally bulldozing eucalyptus trees. And I thought, oh my gosh, that just is awful. I mean, these trees were beautiful, and obviously they had been cut on for some purpose, because you could tell where they had been topped or things like that. And I asked my friend, I'm like, what is going on? And they're like, well, the value of eucalyptus from the floral industry back then was so low that it was more economical to lease the land to like strawberry growers or other vegetable growers.
Really?
Than it was to deal with eucalyptus. Well, now 20 years later, it's one of the hottest things ever. And I think there's so many varieties, but so often I know that the eucalyptus that we would receive had been I don't know if it was foraged or what the right term would be, but basically there were people that would go out, cut this product, bring it in. They would grade it, whether it was seeded uke or willow
Mhm.
uke or true blue or all these varieties, and then we'd get them in, and of course they were amazing. But I just the whole turnaround um, is just really been amazing to me. I feel like when I saw what you had and have been learning about what you do, I feel like there's just this huge opportunity for a lot of people that maybe haven't tried eucalyptus
Mhm.
that would be an incredible, add to their product lines or to their income stream. And I wanted to start by saying, with a name like Southern Ukes, it makes me think sometimes that this is only for Southerners.
Mhm.
But really, what you're doing is you've selected how many varieties that are cold hardy?
We have 15 varieties that are available now, and I have another 10 that are in our trials, but 15 that are currently available that we can, zones can always be tricky. There's always, and I always talk about the microclimates and things like that. So, you can never guarantee an exact zone, but
Right.
the zones that we list, we've had the trees in those. We haven't just had one tree. We've had, our minimum is 12, and where they've succeeded and done well. Again, you can create microclimates. I have a customer in Pennsylvania that has 3 and they're thriving. And she talks about adding additional mulch. She doesn't let them go dry during the winter. There's some things you can do. But yeah, we have 15 that we're real pleased with. That'll hold up to, all of them will hold up 8, most of them 7, and some of them will hold up to zone 6B.
So when you say you're doing these trials, do you
Mhm.
feel like they are well, how long do you trial something before you kind of feel like you can be confident on
Sure.
their hardiness?
Well, it's funny because we actually talked to I don't know if I should say it. Well, I'll say it. We talked to the folks down at Flowerwood Nursery who grow for Southern Living magazine. And, when they kind of make a plant, a Southern Living plant, that obviously it's a huge marketing advantage for a plant. And they started observing some of our trees not too long ago. And I asked them that question. I'm like, you guys are the experts in this. I mean, I know what I do, but I'm not selling 10 million of these things to,
Sure.
Home Depot and Lowe's. And they said there was a time where it was, 10 plus years. And they said because of
Wow.
they said there was a time, but they said because of market forces that just keeps shrinking and shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. So they talk to me more like 1 to 3 years if they see, the right attributes in a plant, the right cold hardiness, the heat tolerance and stuff like that. I try to do mine a minimum of 3 years, Scott, before I'm going to put something out there again, because it's just me for the most part. You know what I mean? So the person I sell to, I kind of have to answer to. So I don't want them losing a plant. So I'd rather be conservative in like where I call a plant cold hardy. So I usually do a minimum of 3 years, and I try to get I usually get a lot more, but I try to get a minimum of 12 plants, and I try to get to like a 75-80% success rate with them. It's kind
That
of
makes
my barometers.
Sure, and that makes
Yeah.
sense. And
Yeah.
it's hard to know too, because like you said, between microclimates or
It
we
is.
have an unusually cold winter. I mean, I remember,
Mm-hmm.
how long ago was it when we had that winter that was like the 100-year cold weather, and it was so crazy. And I was excited to see the eucalyptus still coming back, and
Yeah.
some of them they may have been hit hard, but
Right.
they still bounce back. So how do you source these plants?
Well, I source them from seed. Everything is sourced from seed. Eucalyptus, we've tried. Very difficult to get any type of cuttings from. We haven't gone as far as to get try tissue culture, but we've tried. We cut them. Eucalyptus look beautiful. You cut them, you have them in the greenhouse. You're keeping them misted, and for like 2 weeks, you're just like, oh, they're just little miniature trees. And then at about the 2.5 week point, they just drop. So we have tried and tried and tried. So, but we source them from seed, and that's one of the biggest things where I think you mentioned earlier where I've kind of named the plant. I'm not trying to build any kind of wall around what I'm doing, but we've trialed these trees for a long time. So every time someone goes in and buys maybe Sonera from a Lowe's or Home Depot and it doesn't make it, that kind of hurts us. Like I don't sell Sonera. We trialed it. It didn't hold up. Fine plant, fine tree. You can grow, but it's not as cold hardy. And I have ones that look very similar to Sonera. So I've kind of passed on Sonera. So we've kind of named these trees. We've given them names. Now we'll still call, for example, a neglecta, one of the more popular eucalyptuses. But neglecta, do you want to grow a neglecta or do you want to grow a big O? It's got a big circle plant, a big circle leaf and everything. So we've just given them some fun names just to kind of protect it and to say, if it's a big O, we've sourced that seed from the coldest regions of the world. And that's not easy to do. That took me a few years to kind of navigate through there, because the seed market, the world seed market, is a lot of wholesalers, re-wholesalers, retailers,
Right.
and there's usually not a relationship with a seed grower. So if you ask them, hey, what is is the seed cold sourced from certain areas? Oh yeah, you'll usually get a yeah. Until you can get to the right sources. So once you can get to those right sources, and that's with most plants, if you can source that seed from from a tree that's growing in the coldest regions, in the extremes, that seed is going to be more cold hardy. And that's what we really put a lot of emphasis on with these trials, and consistent. So the seed that I'm working with now is still the seed, most of it, that Angus Heeps started with. And because after I kind of, tried to do some different things, I kind of circled back to his source. And I've been using that source. So I have a relationship with those seed, really primarily it's three seed sources, one in New Zealand and two in Southeast Australia. So seed brought in like from California, you could get a willow, but if it's a tree that was growing in California, it doesn't have that cold tolerance. That seed hasn't, like everything, that seed hasn't evolved, to be cold hardy in a certain area. So that's the real key, and that's what we take a lot of time, a lot of money to just make sure that seed is the right seed. And then, of course, when some of our more mature ones, which you saw in some of our display gardens, as they start seeding it, that's even more wonderful. And then we collect that seed, and then we introduce that into our line. It's the fun part of it too. It's kind of the science, and I enjoy it.
So how are they pollinated? Because is it wind pollinated? I mean, I'm just wondering, like, if you have a lot of different varieties, do they cross over a lot, or do they stay fairly true?
It's a good question. They stay true. I've never had any cross pollination. Every once in a while, from the seed, I'll get, we'll get 10,000 seeds. Every once in a while, we'll get one like, oh, that's a little different. And if we like it, we'll observe it. But again, in our areas, to get the tree mature, a lot of people, especially a lot of people in the floral industry, they know seed eucalyptus, seed eucalyptus, seed eucalyptus. The conditions have to be so ideal for that. So if you're looking for that seed eucalyptus, if that's specifically the look you're looking for, you still might be better off getting that out of California, where those trees are mature and they're getting those. But when you're looking for the different unique leaf structure, and eucalyptuses that grow in the South, or that you would grow in the Mid-Atlantic or the Southwest, or in some parts of the Northeast, when fall sets in winter, these eucalyptuses take on those reds and those sort of chartreuches and those purples and those coppers. So the cool part about that is, if you have this and you're growing all that juvenile foliage in April and May, it looks great. But in October, November, and December, now you're adding that same juvenile foliage, but it's got all these really, really rich reds and oranges and purples. So it's kind of cool. So they're kind of, I see it as they're a little bit different. Like I said, if you want to see eucalyptus, probably still, you're probably still smart going from your West Coast folks. But if you want to grow ones where you can get an abundance of foliage, where you can get different foliage, where you can get that color change in foliage and everything, you might want to try, one of ours.
Sure. Well, and I think too, I mean, how old does a tree have to be before it starts blooming? Does it do it the first season, or does it take it
No.
several seasons?
Yeah, it's got to be in the ground. And most of our, outside of our trees that we trial, most of our, the largest containers we'll get to is about a 15-gallon, just because you and I had spoke about this the other day. They grow so fast. And
Right.
I always tell people that. I'm like, put it in the ground. You'll get 4, 6, 8 feet a year. Now, that being said, we still have some high-end landscapers and designers in the Atlanta area that still want they want to put a 15-foot tall tree in their customer's landscape. So who am I to tell them they can't? But we grow most things long, and we really don't keep that much inventory in. But to answer your question, sorry, I didn't mean to avoid it. Probably about, I'm thinking of the Angus, the Eucalyptus nicolai that I showed you at our location. About 7-year point, we started getting, it's a small white flower, it's a star-shaped flower. The nice part about it is it kind of flowers in late January, early February. So it's a great opportunity for, I sell a lot to beekeepers, because that's that early eucalyptus honey is fabulous honey, but it's also, when they start letting their bees out early, that's a source. There's not a lot of things blooming, in February, late January and February. So the eucalyptus trees give them a nice early thing to get their bees out early on warm days.
Well, I didn't know they bloomed that early in the season.
Yeah.
I never even realized
They
that.
do.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I see happening a lot, and especially on social media, people talking about starting seed versus plugs and all
Mhm.
these different things, and how easy is it to really germinate eucalyptus? I know you say it's
Pretty
fast growing, but
Yeah, I mean it's pretty easy as far as seeds go. Most seed sources come with chaff, so and the seed is tiny. It's amazing that the potential 100-foot tall tree can have, I mean, it is pinprick small. So it's mixed in with the chaff. I'll give you a little tip. The chaff is the orange stuff. The seed is the black. The first time I tried it, I think I planted all the chaff. I thought it was like, and I got nothing. So
I
if
hate
you're
when that
gonna do it,
happens.
yes, the seed is the black. I've done a lot of things over the years now where I've sifted out the chaff, so that helps you. And again, chaff or chafe? Which
Chaff.
one is it? Chaff, chafe, right?
Yeah, there
Is
you
that another
go.
one?
I think
That's
it
another one.
depends on if it's if you're
Niche or
getting
niche?
chafed or yeah, I don't know.
Which one?
Yeah.
That's another one of those words when you're our age, though, right, Scott? You're like, well, it used to be niche, now it's niche,
Yeah,
right?
I don't know. Yeah.
That combined with my Jersey accent, I'm probably saying it wrong. I apologize.
It's all
But
good.
that part of it is a little tricky because it's just so small. You know what I mean? So you can have, a thumbnail size thing and a lot of chaff and stuff, but there could be 200 seeds in there, and all the varieties they all sprout at different times. So that's a little bit of
Oh, okay.
the kind of know-how. But bottom line is, no, if you get your seed in, just keep in mind a lot of it is the chaff. So, or if you have a way to kind of sift or siphon that out. But we use everything from like the 288 flats, which have like 288 cells, or we'll use a 98, which gives the tree a little bit more root system before we move it. And we've tried the automatic. I work with an annual grower, where he has this, I don't know if you've ever seen these cool
Oh
contraptions where
yeah.
you put the seed out, it sucks the air and all that. Well, we've tried that, but it tends to plant the chaff, not the seed, because the seed is so small. So we have tried that, and we get about a 50% coverage, like on a 288. So we'll do the whole seed thing and drop the seed in, and then I'll go back, 2 weeks is usually when you start getting under good conditions, if it's warm out, and I'll still have to go back by hand and kind of reset all those plugs if I want to get, like a 95% coverage. But put them down, a little light dusting. You don't plant them deep. I barely dust them over. Like any other seed, keep it evenly moist, not soaked. Keep it, for usually about 2 to 3 weeks, then you'll start seeing germination. Now, there are some of the snow gums have to be cold stratified, kind of like bulbs. So you have to kind of take them and put them in a Tupperware or a plastic bag with soil, moisten that soil, and then you have to put them in like a refrigerator for usually a minimum of 3 weeks, because you have to kind of mimic that cold, wet season. And then that they get a little trickier than trying to seed out, because now you're going
Right.
through wet soil, and so those are a little tricky. But those are some of the more cold hardy varieties. So we really kind of make that effort, because that they kind of push the boundaries. Some of your snow gums are reportedly down to 10 below. So now I can get folks in your Southern Ohio, Pennsylvania, kind of Oregon's and Washington that can grow those.
So
So.
do you bottom water them? Because I would think with a seed that small, overhead
Mhm.
them would just force them down deeper into the soil.
No, but a light spray. I don't, I'm real light with my spray. I'll bottom water when I get them sprouted out, because then they'll pull that nice water in. And they're a very low feeder, but every once in a while, just to kind of, after I get them into usually maybe a 4-inch container, is I'll bottom water them with a little bit of, I usually use like an Alaskan fish fertilizer, just to give them a little wake up. But they're kind of like, I always say, they're kind of like adolescent kids. You don't want to feed them too much sugar, right? Because then they grow in all the wrong directions. So you're real careful when you do plant them, is don't overfeed them. They're going to grow fast. And I know a lot of, my grower that grows a lot of mine is an annual grower. That was one of our push and pull early on, because he was growing mine with his mums and his pansies and everything. And I was like, you can't water them on the same system. And at first he didn't believe me. And then we got these real tall, leggy ones. And then the one, you just have to be patient. You have to be a little bit of patient. Like I said, you can add a little bit every once in a while, but not much. I mean, they don't require a lot of nutrients. And if you give them too much, they'll get long and leggy, and floral folks don't want that. I mean, they want short and bushy and, all kinds of stuff,
Well, and I would think too that the overall health of the plant isn't going to be there because it's just too susceptible to too many other issues.
You're
So
exactly right.
then how often do you fertilize? Like once every 3 months or more
Yeah,
often
I
than
don't.
that?
So when they're in a plug form, we don't. They're potted in a. The seed has enough nutrients, so they're in a sterile or soilless mix. When we go into a 4-inch container, it's kind of like a quart container. So they'll usually go into a container about 3 inches, and then we'll let them get to about 12 inches there, and then that's when they're kind of ready for retail. Usually now we're on about a 1 week once they get to the 4-inch container, and at first we don't do it, but then they'll go on about a week fertilizing. It's a real, I forget the parts per million, but I could find out for you and let your viewers know, but it's a real diluted formula just to give them a little bit in that pot, because nursery pots are meant to do what they do, which is drain and dry out.
Right. So
usually once, I would say after about 6 or 8 inches. Yeah. And it's a fine line. I know a lot of floral folks, they want to push that, they want to get a lot of nitrogen in there and push that. But if you're patient, and what we've found out too is more cut back. I'd rather see folks, and I always tell people, be more aggressive with cutting them back, because every time, like any plant, you cut back, plant releases auxin, if I remember from my master gardener days. Release that auxin, which is going to push more out. So what we've noticed is you cut them back early, and you cut one and you get 2 or 3. Cut those 2 or 3, you get 5 or 6. So I would really recommend harder cutting back than fertilizing.
So then how big are they when you do maybe that first, well, I always call it pinch, but this is a woody, so it might be harder to do that. How tall do you, I guess maybe it starts with a variety though, because there's not going to be anything that's probably cookie cutter on that. You're
a University of Georgia horticultural grad, right, Scott?
I am.
Okay, so I'm going to give you the real scientific, bear with me here for the science. This is going to be really hard to understand, but we pinch them back when they're too big for the box that they ship in. Because again, remember, I don't grow specifically for the floral industry. I'll talk to folks in the floral industry. I have a great relationship with ASCFG, but we're growing them for homeowners and for nurseries, and so that's when we do. And when you're growing, when we have 7,000 under production right now, pinching it back takes time and energy, and they don't have to have it. You know what I mean? They don't have to have it. But bottom line, what we'll do is, when it's, when our, a quart we usually sells about a 12-inch tree, when it gets 14, 15, 16, it doesn't fit in the box anymore. But what we found is we cut it back, we actually get a better looking tree. You know what I mean? We really do. You get a better looking tree, more sturdy. Again, you kind of stocky up those long limbs of that adolescent. You know what I mean? You add a little, protein in there, and the tree just gets healthier. It really does.
Well, I noticed even when I saw some of the new, it looked like newly potted up 4-inch or quarts, that you could see how some of the varieties just naturally want to branch anyway, and you see a lot of that happening lower down on the stem, and which I think is great. I feel like when I know with your relationship with ASCFG, have you had certain varieties that you've had feedback on that seem to be really popular with the floral industry, or varieties that are easier to grow in the season that they try to produce?
Yeah, we did actually, because I think I'm trying to remember how I actually even heard about the folks there. They're wonderful. But I went to one of their shows to kind of learn a little bit more and get some information. And because I had local florists kind of asking me about it. And again, I'm not growing them for that reason. I grow them to trial them, and then I grow them for, we're growing for specimen trees, for hedgerows, things like that. But I just started getting a lot of, I guess, like you said, that they've kind of taken the industry by storm. So I had a lot of local florists saying, hey, can I get these? And I'd go out and make, cut 4 or 5 dozen, bring them to them, and they loved them. So when I went to the show, I was surprised with some of the varieties that they were interested in. Anything different, anything different. We have one camphor, Eucalyptus camphor, we call Lucky Country. Almost like it has more of like a ginkgo leaf. It has kind of that little edge in the leaf. Angus, the one that I think you saw, very willow-like, almost looks like a fern, or not a fern, but almost looks like
it's a lacy foliage.
Rosemary. Yeah, like a rosemary, right? Especially when they're young, they have all that, and the fragrance on them. So of course, they were, but they actually invited me to a trials that they do with North Carolina State University. So in 2019, we did a trials. We shipped out 15 members. We took 5 trees under trials. Each member got 12 trees of each variety, and they published it in their. Does that work?
Yeah,
They
and the cut.
published it. Isn't it kind of cool? Yeah, in their Cut Flower Quarter, they published it, and they did a whole trials, I don't know if you can see that, on our eucalyptus.
Wow.
And the cool part was they got great results, different results, but they, of the 5 cultivars, they, Big O, which is Neglecta, Cab Sav, which is Rubita, and Funky Monkey, which is Parvula, they've put up for the Cut Flower of the Year. So
Wow.
yeah, those
That's
were the
cool.
3, I would say. Yeah, Neglecta, Big O, Cab Sav. Neglecta Big O is the big circle one, so it's just
Like
a
a silver, we
different.
call it silver dollar. Is
No,
that?
no, much different. No, much
Oh,
different.
okay.
Big O. God, I should have tried. I should have brought some. I should have brought some more aids. But big circle green, not the bluish. And then Funky Monkey is a real small leafed one, which surprised me. But it's a real sturdy branch and everything, and a lot of it was based also on base life and things like that. That's obviously I wasn't as in that my trials didn't focus on those as much as that. And then Cab Sav is more like the silver dollar one, but it also takes on some really cool purples and reds in the fall, and it's just hardier also than the common silver dollar one. So yeah, those were the 3 that folks really seemed to kind of like. And then Angus, of course, was another one that really did well because of that that kind of silvery lace foliage was real desirable.
One of the things that you mentioned the other day that I knew, but I don't think I
Mm-hmm.
knew to this extent,
Mm-hmm.
and people, a lot of people don't know this, but the different leaf shapes in one
Mm-hmm.
variety. The different stages like of
Sure.
immature growth versus mature growth.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear more about that because people who are new to growing eucalyptus might be like, well, this isn't what I ordered, or this is what I was expecting. And I
Yeah.
think to myself, no, this is the same thing. It just has different stages of anyway. So I'd love to hear
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah, in a nutshell, eucalyptus have actually forced their leaf cycle. It's 4 stages of leaf cycle. First one's when it originally seeds out. The pedicel small, but then the second one is the juvenile stage, and that's the stage that you really want your plant living in. After the juvenile stage, it will go to 2 stages of maturity where it's more ovate. It's long. It's probably the eucalyptus that you're used to seeing, the seeded eucalyptus.
Right.
So one could, I have a small one here, like this is Angus. So that's in its juvenile stage. So you see more of the narrow leafed and everything, and this gets blue and everything. But this tree too, I have a 30-foot tall tree of Angus. So as I mentioned, there's 4 stages. This one, to make it more confusing, holds its juvenile stage of leaves. Most of them go through 4 stages of a leaf cycle, finishing in that kind of narrow ovate stage. But by cutting the tree and keeping it smaller, you can keep that juvenile foliage, which is what any floral grower is going to want, unless they're truly trying to get that seeded eucalyptus, and they just need to let it mature. But yeah, there's 4 cycles, which is kind of funny. Every once in a while, the tree, the bottom half will still be in its juvenile stage, and you'll look up top, and the top part is the leaves are starting to elongate. It's very, very interesting how it happens, but it's fun to watch. But the juvenile stage is definitely that stage. Flower growers and folks doing that type of arrangements and things, they want to keep that tree in that stage.
Well, I also think when you're growing eucalyptus, there is like what I saw, especially in your trial area, these specimen trees, they get big, which obviously for landscape or for homeowners is their redeeming value and really what people are looking for. I feel like for the cut industry, often we would, when a tree gets to a certain height, we would cut it down in order to have branching come up through or just get more of that juvenile growth for cut production.
Yep.
And I want to I'm just curious, at what point is it ever too soon to do that, or can you just I don't know how to ask the question. I'm
Sure.
trying to figure out.
No, I know what you're talking. What's the sweet spot?
Right.
I think.
Exactly.
And I think I showed you the one tree, I think, Scott, that I think I showed you, the elliptical, the Grace, which was about 30-foot tall tree. Remember, you saw the trunk on it was probably close to 1 foot in diameter. Now, you saw what it created, which was this beautiful 4-foot shrub of all this new growth. And again, I'm experimenting with them. If I were growing it for purely for the foliage, would I have let it get 30 feet? No.
Right.
Would I have pinched it back at 6 inches, 8 inches, 12 inches? Yeah, I would. You know what I mean? Because you're growing more. But I would say probably in its second or third year, if you're growing it, if you're growing, say you're growing a dozen big O's, I would say get them in the ground first year. You know, let it kind of settle in and everything. Second year, you can start being a little bit more aggressive on cutting the foliage. And I would say the third year, and there's no hard science to this, but this is just kind of what I've seen, where I would say that third year, when that plant is really, you know, well rooted in, it's got a nice diameter to its trunk. And even if it was a single trunk, you can cut that back all the way literally to the ground. All eucalyptus have what's called a lignotuber, sorry, and it's kind of a cluster of cells at the base. And you'll see it sometimes where it kind of swells. And that's there for its natural habitat to protect it against forest fires, which happen in places. So those trees can be caught in a fire, can be completely taken out, and they'll grow back. Well, you can do the same thing by coppicing them or cutting them back, and then that cell is going to release all of that new foliage. And that's really, really where you want to get to as a foliage grower. You don't want to be reaching 12 foot in the air, right? You want that thing bushy, shrubby, and they'll do it. Some will do it better than others, but they'll all return that from that single one.
Wow.
Yeah. And usually late winter, early spring is the best time to do that too, just before the plants, because eucalyptus are evergreen, but in more colder regions, they'll slow down. Some will even defoliate a little bit. You know, they're not a deciduous tree; they are an evergreen. But what we've noticed is, am I losing it? You know, I'll come out there in February or March and I'll see a lot of browning leaves. And at first I thought, I lost it. A little bit of patience. Not only will they usually return from the bottom, but oftentimes they'll return from the trunk and stems too, with beautiful new foliage.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I think sometimes Mother Nature does that pruning for us. You know, if we do have an unusually cold year. I know I was surprised, and I can't remember if I've shared this story on our podcast before, but I know I did with you, where we had a tree that was sort of in the power line area. And so you kind of back at the wholesaler I used to work at, and it got to be 20 feet high easily. And then we had that polar vortex come through, like you talked about, and it looked like it killed this tree. And I want to say the caliper of the trunk was easily 18 inches. I mean, it was it was a big tree.
Yeah.
And it was such a beautiful specimen in the landscape with the blue-green foliage and everything about it. It was just so pretty. Well, when this vortex came through, it looked like it killed this tree completely. And the gentleman that maintained this area, he went up probably, I'm going to guess and say 10 feet, and just chop the top of the tree off. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this looks so awful. Here's this gigantic pole coming up out of the ground. And I'm just like, I mean, what did you have to lose, right? You really have nothing to lose. And so he did that. And not only did it, like you said, it started just coming out with all this growth about 2 months later, I want to say, because we just sat there and watched this, 12-foot stump in the in the very front of our property. And then all of a sudden it's like it just woke up, and hundreds of branches all over this stump, this 12-foot stump, from the top, from the base, and a few places in between where had been some branching. And I'm just like, wow, I am amazed at the resilience of eucalyptus. And I think it's been from that point on, I'm just like, this is not something that has to only grow in California. This is something that we can all enjoy. And I don't know, I was really pretty excited about that. I feel like when it comes to eucalyptus, there is a lot of people who are afraid of growing it because they think it's not going to be hardy or what have you. And so how do you distribute? I mean, because you kind of have a system, which I am amazed at. So what's the best way if I want to put something in my landscape or trial some eucalyptus of my own in our own farm or property, what's the best way to go about like picking which ones I want, or connecting with you to do that?
I'm going to take 2 steps back, but don't let me forget to get 2 steps forward, because I told you I can do this sometimes. But how cool that when they did that, when you talked about when he chopped that down, I bet you the specimen that came out of it was just amazing, right? Like I said, at first they chopped it and you thought, oh my God, I'm starting to see a lot of folks doing bonsai who are calling me and saying, because you can do that, you can get that big, bulky wood rooted area and cut it back, and then it's growing back out. So we're starting to see some
That's
bonsai
neat.
folks. It's never going to be a small bonsai, but the guys who are doing it want the bigger ones, because especially some of the ones that have that small leaf. So I'm starting to see some incredible bonsai specimens out of it.
Wow.
You talked about it being cut back, Scott. They're in the crepe myrtle family. So eucalyptus is in our if you're a southerner, yeah, they are. They're in the myrtaceae family. So hence the exfoliating bark, the cinnamon trunks, the smooth trunks you get. And as well as I do what happens every February and March in Atlanta to our crepe myrtle. Crepe myrtles or get crepe murdered, right? They go in and just
so sad.
Kill them, right? They kill, but they grow back. So yeah, it's just part of the DNA of the plant. Okay, I think I remembered. Your question was, though, how do you choose one? No, I agree, Scott. It's I do landscape design for friends and family. I don't own the nursery anymore, so but if someone I know and has an appreciation for plants, and I'll do a design, and a big part of it is where windows are, where eaves are, how big something can get, just the size, the eventual size, because you don't want to spend your life chopping and cutting and pruning all the times. So the big thing is, I would say, is pay attention first to, well, let me back up 1 second, the cold hardiness. If you're in Virginia and you're trying to push this, maybe not a plant that's only been proved to zone 8A. So try to match your zone the best you can is the first thing. And then the second one, I think, is height. Even before you start looking at foliage, if you're trying to grow something as a specimen in your yard, find your zone area, then look at the eventual height on it. Okay, now all plants are going to be a little bit different. I can't tell you exactly this tree is going to finish at 15, but I can get you pretty close. And then after that, and I know it's hard, but then start looking at the leaf foliage and what the bark will do and everything. And we have all of that on our website at if I can tell, it's the southernyoucs.com site. I've got pictures, I've got zones, I've got heights, I've got, where this plant does well. A lot of Eucs will handle kind of damp, wet soil, which a lot of plants won't, but a lot of Eucs, once established, will do okay in that area. Most eucalyptus want full sun, but what we've noticed in some of the hotter parts of the South, a little bit of shade's not a bad thing. I think you saw the neglecta on our trials area planted underneath the pecan tree and doing just fine. So a lot of that is trial and error, but I think it starts with match the zone. I think then the second thing is look for your height, what it can get. Now, and if you have to have a certain foliage, and it's a 30-foot tall tree and you got a power line, just be aware you're going to have to do some maintenance on it. But the maintenance it's not like if you turn around, it's going to be a 20-foot tall tree. If you start the maintenance early, you can manage them quite well.
Well, too, I think if you're growing it for cut production, then you're going to be cutting on it anyway. So
you are. Right.
You can selectively prune and cut and sell all at the same time easily. I feel like a lot of times too, one of the benefits of using these hardy eucalyptus is that I know a lot of people who go through the whole process of seed and starting, this product, it'd be nice to be able to have a more permanent part of the farm that you have rows of eucalyptus that can, you don't have to redo every year, but in fact, with each year become more vigorous and more profitable, really, when you look at it like that.
Yeah, that was one of the things when I started working with ASCFG was a lot of growers would tell me, I start my seed here, and if I'm lucky, I get it by midsummer or fall, and then it's kind of late, right? You would have loved to have all that foliage in your displays in March, April, and May. So I think that is the big advantage of growing cold hardy varieties that you can winter over. And that when I mean winter over, not bring them inside per se. They actually, some people have had success growing them inside. I haven't done a lot of work with it, and it's a big tree, you know what I mean? So if you can't get enough light on it, which is hard to do, you have drying agents in a house, the heat and air and stuff like that. So I don't recommend bringing them inside, but I've had some folks up in Pennsylvania, putting them in like a tall hoop house or doing some things like that, just to where they can kind of, they can extend that zone just a little bit. So I have one grower in Pennsylvania that grows them in 15 gallons containers. And then when winter comes, she just kind of lifts that 15-gallon container and puts it in her tall house or her hoop house and just gives it a little more protection. And that's what she's been able to do. And then come next March, goes back out, she's got a 5 or 6 year old eucalyptus tree that as soon as the weather warms and a little bit of fertilizer, she's got foliage. She's got foliage in April and May, beginning in April and May.
I think too, up north, growing up in Northwest Ohio as a little child, there were a lot of plants that my grandfather would take like a hog wire or something and put
Yeah,
over the plant, and then fill it
yeah,
up with foliage or like leaves from the trees
sure.
in order to kind of create this extra insulation.
Yeah.
Is there any tips about that maybe would fall in line with farther north, like really trying to help the tree come out like that, like mulching, or I don't
Yeah,
know.
microclimates. You're talking about trying to
Yeah,
seek out or build a microclimate. Yeah, I mean, it starts with mulch. It starts with a good layer of mulch. I always tell folks, especially in areas, really in any areas for this tree, because it's an evergreen tree. It's still photosynthesizing through January, February, and March. So good layer of mulch to keep it in. Don't let it dry out. A lot of people forget to water when it's not 90 degrees, but it's still
right.
real important for eucalyptus to just once a week, if it's not raining, give it some water. Give it some water. A microclimate, maybe a little bit if you have an area where you have a hedgerow or a side of a building where maybe some winds come in, just to give it a little bit of a break from those cold, drying winds, are probably the three. Those three don't take a lot of effort. You know what I mean? Choose your site that maybe offers a little protection, an extra layer of mulch, and don't let it dry out. And then you can from there, if it's your business, you can go on to things, stakes in the ground, plastic, frost cloth. But, again, a frost isn't going to hurt them. This would be, for at least the varieties that we sell, I would say, when it starts sneaking below 5 degrees, when you start getting into the single digits and below is when, you might need to put some extreme caution to some of the trees,
Well, I'm glad you said that, because I want to ask, because we have listeners all up and down, in all the zones, it feels like. What is the absolute cold hardiest variety that you grow, or at least
Ooh,
that you've had feedback on?
yeah. That's a good question, because I've heard of success stories throughout. I have a person in Northern Virginia with Camphora, which is our lucky country, who planted 5. 2 died back to the ground, came back. The other 3 are thriving. Big O, which is Neglecta, which is is our most popular variety, I would say is probably our tried and true, single digits won't give it a problem. I haven't had it, consistently below single digits. But the snow gums, which I don't really recommend for the South, because, when I entered into these trials, it was all about cold hardiness. But then what I realized was, oh boy, our Atlanta summers, when it's 90 degrees and humidity, some of these plants don't like that. They won't hold
Interesting.
up as well. Yeah. So we've tried some things like sneaking them. I think you had even recommended maybe sneaking them into a little bit of a shade and everything. And we have some ongoing trials with that. But, if I have a customer that calls me and wants what plant should I buy, and they're in Atlanta, I'm probably not going to tell them one of the snow gums. Now, if it's an advanced gardener and they can maybe get into some shade, they could probably grow it. But I hold that for more of my areas where the humidity is not as much of an issue. Some of the Oregons and Washingtons, they do really well out there. So I guess it really depends. I guess, like I said, Big O, Neglecta is probably our LeBron James. That's our, can't miss, great tree. It's not a really tall tree. It finishes at about 20 feet. Real hardy, some nice fragrance, does good in arrangements. So I say that, but I think if you start really getting into, I'm trying to push this into, somewhere in the Northeast and stuff, I would say some of the snow gums, some of the passifloras, or the perianas, which are the single stem. I think you've seen in the floral industry, the single stem that grows right through the center of the leaf.
Right.
That's snow gum. That's extremely, extremely cold hardy. The experts will tell you down to 10 below. But
Wow.
again, that's one where the South is just the summer is when I lose it. I never thought I would lose them. I thought I get them through winter,
Right.
I'm fine. But one of the early trials things I learned was summer, dry, hot, humid can be tough on plants.
Yeah. There's a
So I
lot
guess
of plants like that we just
yeah,
forget about, that for sure.
we do. Funky Monkey is another one, the Parvula variety that the ASCFG has put up for its cut flower of the year, is another really, really cold hardy. I'd probably put that a close second behind the Neglecta Big O, as far as, if you want really cool foliage, real hardy. They produce lots of foliage, and they're just 2 of the more cold hardy varieties that we have. Just really, really strong, steadfast varieties.
Yeah, that's great.
But it's hard. It's like picking a favorite kid too.
I know.
The Angus one that I think you like, the Willow one, I love. I have that here. You saw the 30-foot tall tree in zone 8.
Amazing.
I've seen it to 7. I wouldn't recommend that tree below, zone 7 is where you're kind of starting to get it. I wouldn't recommend that tree to a zone 6,
Right.
unless it's a really, and I do get some folks who they want to prove cold hardiness themselves. And I want to try it. Okay, I'm just letting you know, get a really cold winter here, you might have a hard time with this tree.
Well, and it's too, I mean, this year, one of the things I've learned is not all zone 7s are the same. When you have some 7s that may have 1,500 chill hours below freezing, and some might have over 4,000. So and being able to endure some of those cold temperatures, those number of days can be a challenge.
They can.
So but
what challenge, and in the South that challenges us too. You garden in the South too. When you're in January and February and it's 20 degrees and 15 degrees, and then 2 days later it's 70 degrees in the afternoon. That's not great for plants either. Sometimes that cold snow covering insulation is easier on plants.
Right.
So, and we get the freezing rain sometimes, which is never good on an evergreen tree. That freezing rain, sometimes they'll bend over the smaller ones, but we leave them alone and they tend to right themselves.
That's really awesome. Yeah. What has been one of the biggest challenges you've had to face in doing all of this, do you think?
Because it's my second job. Right? I mean, really, I think it is. That's the biggest thing. It started as, I don't want to say a hobby, but it was, or a niche. But just it's grown. Like you said, the eucalyptus kind of thing has really exploded. The tree itself, it checks off all the best boxes. Fast growing, disease resistant, evergreen, fragrant, blooms early in February for bee growers, timber. We actually grew 2,000 of our MacArthurite Jersey Girl, which is a tall variety for the Johnny Appleseed project down in South Georgia, because they're doing entropic farming, which my understanding is kind of tiered farming. They're saying, stop the whole, bulldoze the whole thing and grow one crop. It's the whole kind of create a canopy for your plants and everything. And they love that tree because it creates that tall canopy, creates lots of foliage. And then when it gets tall, they cut it down, they drop it in there. It's feeding the soil for the next thing. And then it's also sprouting again. So we grew a number of trees for them for that purpose. So I would just say that, the challenge would just be probably my personal challenge was just keeping pace. I have a job that requires travel and deadlines and edit rooms and things like that. So this has been a little tricky. It's been fun, don't get me wrong. It offers great pleasure, but to really kind of delve into it, you can't leave plants alone in a black container in Atlanta in July without tending to them. So
regularly, sometimes twice a day. Yeah,
sometimes twice a day. No, right? Yeah, you're right. I mean, there's a reason that black pot, it's designed to heat up, to grow plants. I mean, I get it, but that's probably been my biggest challenge. And that's just more from a personal side of things, I think. But again, I'd rather have it no other way. I've partnered with Wilson Brothers Gardens, who are kind of going to helping me with that this year. They've taken over some of the growing. They have facilities in the Southeast and the Northwest, so plants can be shipped. They're a larger organization. They can offer free shipping. So my site is still there. You can find out about all the plants on southernyoucs.com. But when you go there, if you find a plant you like, you click over, and then they handle the shipping, the fulfillment, the packaging, and everything. And they can just do a better job because they've got 30 people doing it. I had one. So it was a partnership that kind of probably needed to happen,
Oh, that's really smart. Plus they have other plants too that, if you're there, then you might be interested. So do you?
Yeah, they do.
Do you, okay, so then you have one nursery who kind of grows the material, and then you have this other nursery that pretty much ships the material. Mm-hmm. And then you're doing all the trialing and testing of the material.
Yeah. I maintain my seed bank. So the seed banks maintain all my relationships, all the seed bank. It's still Southern Eucs. It's still my company, but I've just kind of, I don't know what the right word is.
You contracted out.
And then they're all the people that really do. Even Wilson Brothers Gardens, who is the online site, they were a nursery in my town of McDonough, Georgia for 40 years. I mean, they're plantsmen. And I didn't, to be honest with you, I didn't even think about that. Shame on me. But yeah, you're right. When you get it from them, you can get, a eucalyptus or two, but you can also get an encore azalea. You can get a princess dogwood. So I didn't even think about that. So there's benefits to that too. But yeah, and then I do I maintain my trials. I still grow for some of my local florists. I think we have a familiar friend of Floral Park, James, up at Floral Park. Kind of a nice kind of market, if you will, at a midtown market.
Sure.
He sells my eucalyptus. I have a nursery here. Coweta Gardens is kind of a re-wholesale that buys a bunch from me. So I still grow for kind of my individual nurseries, Harps Farm, some of the bigger, better nurseries and floral markets around town. But anything online, all the information's on southernukes.com, but then it kind of shifts over to Wilson Brothers. And then I'm trialing, I have, which it's not cold hardy. I'm not saying rainbow eucalyptus is not cold hardy. It's not. But I'm trialing a few just to see. I had a customer who had some. If you're not familiar with rainbow eucalyptus, you see them a lot in Hawaii, Scott. It is, literally the trunk looks like a rainbow with oranges and purples and yellows and reds. It's a stunning eucalyptus, big eucalyptus. But reportedly, it's not cold hardy below about 30 degrees. But I had a customer of mine who was big into trees, and he said, I got some seed. Do you want it? And sure. So I have them. They're out there. They're this big. I don't expect anything, but I'm always trialing something new. I hear from my customers size. Houses are getting smaller, areas are getting smaller. People want to put them on patios. So a lot of the trees that I'm trying to prove cold hardiness now are trees that'll finish at 6, 8, 10, 12 feet tall. Give you maybe a second option then from like a Japanese maple as a specimen tree. So I kind of listen to folks and see what they want. Most people can't handle 100-foot tall tree, but Johnny Appleseed, who wants to, is in tropic farming, wants 2,000 of them. So there's a balance. But my niche has always been, I think, more of the homeowner that wants, the emerging gardener, maybe in a first home that sees something. The blue silver kind of foliage just pairs. It stands out in the landscape one way or another. But then pair it with like a Laura pedalum or something underneath it that's red. It's
stunning.
Yeah, it really is. Or in a display, right? You put that blue silver, which is hard to get, right? What else do you get with it? Lysimachia. I'm trying to think some of the other things in the floral industry, right? It's a tough color to get to hold up in a display, I would imagine.
Yeah, it can be. Well, I was just thinking. So what is the smallest size plant that you ship?
It's a 4-inch container. We sell it it's a quart. We sell it as a quart.
Okay.
Yeah.
And most of those, when you ship them, are in that 12-ish range.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're looking at a first year tree about fully rooted. Really drop in the ground, especially early spring. The best time to get in the ground, especially if you're in an area where you're on the verge of your zone. I know a lot of people think trees you plant them in the fall. Eucalyptus, really, you're better planting in late winter, early spring, just to give a growing season for that root, for that roots to establish. Sure. But again, all of our trees stay in zone 7 and 8 in containers, which, as you know, it's much cold. There's a lot more cold in a container. The wind whips around it, it dries out. So ours are kept, over winter, not even in greenhouses, and they do great. They'll take on some winter damage sometimes, but early spring, midsummer. You can plant all the way through summer, but I always like to get them in as early as possible if you can. You have a better chance of that tree just, those roots establishing and getting spread out.
Right. I can understand that. So I always love to ask the advice question, and it can be something that you just want to give growers, or possibly somebody's giving you a piece of advice that you'd like to share with our listeners.
Can I combine it with like the advice I give? Not that your viewers are my children, but I've got a 24-year-old. I got a 24-year-old in law school. I got an 18-year-old and a freshman in college, and I've always told them to chase happiness. And they throw it back at me all the time. My son's about to graduate law school. He wants to be a public defender, which I think is fabulous, but a lot of debt. Public defender as opposed to going into corporate law. But he'll say to me, there's a reason. He believes in the Constitution. He thinks minorities are underserved. He has all these reasons, and he keeps saying to me, "You always told me that it's not about money. It's about chase happiness, right?" So, I would say that I kind of chase it. I love what I do as a TV producer, but gardening has always been a passion of mine. So, I kind of combined the two. When I had the nursery back in the early 2000s, and when I had to get out of the nursery business, I think the biggest thing I missed was the kind of the science to it. I read your bio, I think it was, and I want to ask you that question if we have time. Dr. Alan Armitage was actually your advisor. Is that true?
Yeah, it's
That's
true.
really cool. If your viewers
Yeah.
don't know that, I'm going to start asking you some questions. I mean, I followed Armitage and Durr forever. They were my
All right.
heroes.
Yeah.
They were my heroes. So I really missed that part of the nursery business, dealing with my growers and what's the new plants. And, when plants came in off the truck, were they handled properly? And were they grown in the right material? So this kind of let me, this whole Southern Eucs, the trials kind of really just let me kind of keep that part of the nursery business alive, which has been really healthy for me. This year has been tough on everybody. The TV business for 4 months just stopped. Last March, April, May, and June, I wasn't working, but I all of a sudden shifted my attention to Southern Eucs. That's actually where the partnership with Wilson Brothers Gardens came in. I really started doing I've just spent a lot more time in the trials and at the nursery, kind of experimenting different plants, trying different things, and it's really helped me. That 4 months, I probably learned, that was probably the best sweet spot in trialing these things for 15 years, because I was kind of really singly focused on it. So I would just say, chase happiness. If it's something you want to do, try it. Look to be different, look to expose a niche or niche. Don't do what everyone else is doing. Try something different. And I understand sometimes you got to make a living. You might have to grow
Right.
carnations, but look to here. It keeps it interesting. It keeps it fun. Even if it doesn't work, even if you can't develop that, even if these eucalyptus all died in that first or second year with that polar vortex we had, I still would have been in a better place and happier for the experience. I think
I
that
love
would
that.
be mine. That would be my
Yeah.
advice.
I love that. And of course, when you were saying that, it made me think of one more question, which
Yeah.
is not usually what I want to do right now, but I just have to ask.
Okay.
So, growing this sort of, well, they're trees, growing these trees,
Mhm.
especially from seed. I'm curious, do you use any kind of a different mix in your soil
Mhm.
because of the weight or the size or the
Yeah.
caliper of the material?
Great question. We experiment with it all the time, constantly. We're constantly refining it. My grower is an annual grower, so what I found out is, obviously seed is started in a soilless, mix. We're not, we don't want anything in that. You know what I mean? It's perlite, it's sand, it's there, it's peat. There's no nutrients or anything, for the seed. You don't want that. But our 4-inch or a quart container he's an annual grower. So it's a nice pro mix, I think is called, and it's just very light, and the roots just explode in it. Because he'll
Okay,
feed it
good.
again about once a week. But so what I found out when my annual growers started growing them, we got them really quick to 12 inches and then into gallons. So sometimes our gallons are, 2-foot tall tree. Okay, so more mature. But then when we started, the next step is 3 gallons, and that's the nursery business. You're from container to container. You're always chasing yourself because you want to have the bigger plants available too. But that soil mix didn't hold up in the 3 gallons. There was just nothing there for the roots to grab onto. So then we started having to go back and adding some pine fines to it just to add a little bit of weight. But again, more weight is more expensive to ship. So
Right.
there's that really fine balance. But yeah, I would say for our quarts and gallons, the pro mix, which a lot of your growers are probably used to, it's a very
Right.
light mix, perlite heavy. But then when we got into 3 gallons, or if a grower wants to get it into a 15 gallon, you really need to introduce some type of an organic matter in there. Pine fines are a great one. Just tiny pine fines, and that's what all my tree growers, when I had the nursery, Harps Farm is here in Atlanta, and one of the best growers in the country. And that's all he grows his trees in straight pine fines, because those roots can run. They can do. Now the pot's going to drain. Again, if you're managing it, you're watering it once, sometimes twice a day, but those roots are really kind of doing what you want those roots to do. There's lots of oxygen in there. They can run. Water and nutrients can run through it. So yeah, we're always tweaking it and kind of messing with it. You definitely don't want any kind of heavy peat or anything, because a kind of a root bound or it's not good for many plants at all. When water's just sitting on there, and a lot of my customers try to do that sometimes. Oh, I filled it with. So I said, oh, you dug a hole out of red clay and you filled it with peat moss. And I said, well, that's wonderful until it rains a few times a week, because how red clay can do, it creates a bowl. So you really
Right.
just need to, you got to get that drainage. That's one of the few things that's usually where I start with if someone's having a problem with eucalyptus, is drainage. Is it draining properly? Because again, back to their native habitat, the Australian soil and New Zealand soils are very kind of rocky and porous. again, they're infertile, right? Nutrients kind of tend to go through sandy, kind of porous
Right.
soils, but that's kind of what they want. So, the best combination when someone gets it in the ground is kind of part clay, part sand, part organic matter, like any good soil.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Well, I love that. Well, Ed, thank you so much for this time. I've learned so much, and I can't wait to add more eucalyptus to my world one way or the other. So I appreciate your time so much.
that was a blast, Scott. It was a blast.